And 12 o'clock. Guys, wonderful. Okay, just to check then, can you hear me? Great, okay, I moved this week, so I'm in a new condo. With any luck, I've got decent connection. It's been okay so far. Okay, so before we start with the main event, I've got some recent articles. These will be on the notes, so you can catch up later. I'll give a bit of an outline. One which, I mean, you don't have to read these articles, but they're there for background. But one which I would recommend, a bit long, is a super article on the ethical problems within the Trump administration. The president seems to be treating the Republic as his own source of income and removing some of the checks and balances. The idea of checks and balances is important in the US Constitution. And this is getting worse as the administration comes to its end. There's an election in November. The article's long, as I say, but it deals with ethics in several ways and looks at a number of things that don't normally appear in general news reports. At the beginning of the trimester, I gave you a list of movies and books which I thought might be worth considering. One of those was the movie called Trust. I also shared with you that Peter Steiner cartoon with the two dogs, when they say on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. So this week I found an article from Britain in which a guy pretended he was a 15-year-old girl and asked teenage boys from a number of UK cities, I mean there's quite a lot, to send naked pictures of themselves, and then he blackmailed them to send more. And when a couple of them declined, he sent pictures to friends at school. I mean, this is just devastating, so cruel. A mother of one victim, let me read this quote, said to watch him experience shame, hurt, paranoia, anxiety and depression was so hard. I don't know what the attitude here is by the police, you know, sharing pictures of this nature. In the UK, and reading this article, there seems to be a sort of, you know, boys will be boys thing, you know, sort of, they seem to be fairly relaxed from what I've seen so far. In America, it's completely different, and teenagers end up on the sex register, and that's like a conviction for life. So guys, don't share pictures, or at least only share them with people you know. Right. We'll be looking at copyright later. This week, a number of publishers are reported to be suing an online source for sharing copies of their books, free ebooks. Books out of copyright are legitimately online. There's something called the Gutenberg Project, but this appears to be unethical. Even though the site claims it's lifted all restrictions on lending until the end of the public health crisis. You know, in my opinion, this isn't right. Books out of copyright, yes, but books in copyright should not be distributed free. What I found also this week, Apple is sometimes sued by upset users. You know, that's what happens. Apple's got a lot of money. Although many lawsuits are driven more by lawyers. One that I saw this week sort of exceeds, you know, the others that passed me by. As a man in Missouri is suing Apple for $1 trillion. It's a little under Apple's market cap, which is currently, I checked this morning, 1.491 trillion, right? So Apple does have a lot of money, but 1 trillion to be sued, that's a little bit excessive. The interesting thing, I put the link in the notes. If you read the handwritten complaint, the guy's a nutcase. I mean, it's really quite clear, it's really quite funny. You can see that in the article from patentlyapple.com, but the documents are included and they're really, really weird. Okay, let me start the main content, this time with news from IBM over its facial recognition program. The company announced that it's leaving the facial recognition business and calls on Congress to advance policies tackling racial injustice. Now, when companies like Big Blue are rethinking their work for ethical reasons, we all need to take notice. So, I've rewritten this week's stuff because of the events of the last 2 weeks. Like I told you, the world changes, and this time the world has changed dramatically. From comments online and the amount of news that's been coming out, it seems there's now a worldwide appreciation of the difficulties black people face, particularly with the police in the USA. Not just there, right, but particularly there. Let me Let me introduce you to an acronym, BAME, B-A-M-E. I don't know if any of you have heard of this. Yes, no, response? Anybody heard of BAME? No crap. Okay, so no, okay. Great. Okay, so the general consensus is that you've not heard of this. Well, fine, you're about to be educated. Well, I hope you always are. BAME means Black, Asian, Middle Eastern, and so refers to you, right? These groups of people suffer, which is you, suffer from white people, which is me, of course, right? Particularly in the USA. They're minorities, and because they stand out, I mean, if you go to a place like San Francisco, it's very well integrated. But if you go to other places, I drove across southern America a few years ago, and because of my accent, people treated me very differently. I just say I don't have an accent, it's you. Okay, so it's not just black people who suffer from extremes of behavior, other groups too. You guys heard of the rainbow groups? LGBT? Yes, yeah, oh yes, somebody said, yeah, okay, good. So LGBT is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transvestite. I'm sure that some of you have friends who fall into this category. I do, of course. This weekend, J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter woman, the girl who wrote Harry Potter, she's under fire from LGBT groups because of her tweets on transvestites. This also prompted Daniel Radcliffe, who played Harry Potter, to put out sensitive comments on the situation. There's a link there, and that's really worthwhile reading because he's been very sensitive towards this. Connected to this is the news that an actor by the name of Hartley Sawyer, he's the elongated man in the Flash movie. He's been sacked from the TV. Oh, it's the TV show, not a movie. He's been sacked from the TV show after offensive tweets resurfaced. A lot of these tweets and old photographs get recycled these days. You know, you put it in the trash, it's not gone forever. Okay, so let's get to the main point. George Floyd. This is the man who, for 8 minutes and 40 seconds, was killed by a policeman who put his knee on his neck. He's not the first black man to be killed by police. When I looked at research, I found that in 2015, for example, more than 100 unarmed black men were killed, or black people were killed. So just unarmed 100 in 2015. It's worth thinking about why blacks have been treated so badly by America. What we need to consider is that most blacks in America, or at least their families, not the current ones, most blacks in America were brought over as slaves from Africa. Remember too, you should remember this, there were no white folks in America before mass emigration, mainly in the 18th, 19th and 20th centuries. In the main, Native Americans were exterminated, with a few now in camps, somewhat like Aborigines in Australia. When I was a kid, we used to see movies, cowboys and Indians, and the Indians were always the evil people, killing the nice, clean white settlers. If you look at the real history, the Indians were trying to protect their lands, worked with nature, and the white men wanted the land. And they just swept right across from east to west. So there's a real moral and ethical question there, particularly with the movie makers and who sort of painted the picture of the Red Indian was always evil. This just is not true. So, as well as the Aborigines in Australia, it was also true for South Africa and a country called Rhodesia, which is now South Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, where English and Dutch German farmers settled the land and blacks became second-class citizens under a system called apartheid. The English translation of that is apartheid, separating blacks and whites. The blacks were second-class citizens.
Is there something else I can help with?
What? Oh gosh, that's my watch speaking to me. I must have banged that. Okay, on other occasions, these unnecessary deaths have been met with civil violence. I mean, this has happened more than once, and it's usually over in a few days. But sometimes the social anger is too great. And some of the great changes in society have come from the frustration in the civil population because they're powerless. I'll give you a couple of examples here. There's the two English revolutions. In 1640, the removal and execution of Charles I, the king. And in 1688, James II was replaced by William and Mary. He was a Dutch guy, William of Orange, and it was mainly about the Catholic and Protestant control of the crown. So that's partly religious. The French Revolution, which started in 1789 and led to the overthrow of the Bourbon? Yes, it is Bourbon monarchy. Bourbon is the whiskey, Bourbon is the monarchy. Slight aside here, many of you will have seen photographs or videos or something or movies in which the guillotine was used. As an aside here, this isn't in the notes, I'm making this up as I go along. The guillotine was introduced as a humanitarian means of execution. The reason for that was that before the guillotine, which actually sort of comes down the blade very, very fast, and the head is severed immediately. So therefore life ends straight away. With the previous forms of execution, like the sword or the axe, it may take, sort of 5, 6, 7 chops before the head is severed and the person is still alive. And so for the time, that period, the guillotine was actually a more humanitarian means of execution. I mean, I don't think there should be execution anyway, but there you go. Okay, so that's the French Revolution. We also had the Russian Revolution, which was in October 1917. And that brought about the overthrow of the Tsars and the introduction of the communist government under Vladimir Lenin. The word Tsar, T-S-A-R, or the emperor, comes from a word like Kaiser in German, the emperor in Germany. And this actually comes from Caesar. The Latin pronunciation would be Kaiser, the name given to Roman emperors. So Julius Caesar, his name, became Kaiser or Tsar by default. Okay, so the poor treatment of blacks extended after the end of slavery. And many blacks would be wrongfully accused of crimes. I've got a couple of links in the notes. There's a PDF about race and wrongful convictions. And there are a number of famous cases like Emmett Till, who was a 14-year-old who was murdered in, I think it was Missouri, for looking at a white woman, 14-year-old kid. And there was George Junius Stinney Jr., again 14-year-olds, who was wrongly convicted of murder and executed in the electric chair. There are several movies been made about this, including The Green Mile, which was loosely based on the events. If anybody's seen The Green Mile, the actual black person in that is quite a bit older, but the events enabled Stephen King to sort of form a story from that. There's also a group of people a few years ago called the Central Park Five. This was a group of black and Latino teenagers who were wrongly convicted of rape. This one particularly became famous because Trump, when he was a businessman in New York, called for the death penalty. These guys were later found to be not guilty. Okay, so blacks, they're not slaves, but they're still second-class citizens. They were liable to house burnings, beatings, and visits from the Ku Klux Klan. These are white supremacists. If you've ever seen pictures of the Ku Klux Klan, I can never say this. These are guys who wear sort of big conical hats and white robes. So they got eye holes cut out. So they're completely anonymous, which to me is a sign of weakness. If you have to hide your identity, then you're a weak person. And there were also lynchings. There was recently a modern lynching a few days before the death of George Floyd, when a black man was shot, and it took the police a month to carry out inquiries. That only happened when one of them posted a video on the internet. I haven't got a link for that, but you see the guy jogging down the road followed by a car, and then he goes behind a pickup truck, and then he comes out with one of the people firing a gun at a shotgun, and the second shot goes right through him. It's quite a gripping piece of video. Have you heard of the word lynching? Yes, no, quickly? Yes, okay, thank you. This is where somebody does not go through a proper trial or goes through no trial at all, and is just hanged from a tree, usually, or a building or something. There's a reminder of it's gone on for centuries, of course. There's a reminder of the common idea of lynchings in the 1939 Billie Holiday number called Strange Fruit. You imagine that, sort of something hanging from a tree. This was later also recorded by a wonderful artist called Nina Simone and by a group called UB40. This particular song, Strange Fruit, has been called the first protest song. So I'm going to switch now to the desk view, share content. And so first picture is a little bit dramatic. If you don't like nasty images, don't look, okay? So let's see if I can get onto this. Oh, what am I doing? Share screen? What am I doing? Oh, hell. Can you see my screen? Guys, can somebody see my screen? Yeah. Oh, great. Okay, so you can see the mouse going backwards and forwards. Okay, thanks. So let me get to this. Okay, so here's our first image. And this is actually of a woman hanging from a tree. I've seen others of men. Can you all see that, guys? Yes, can we see that? Are you still with me? Yeah, you can. Okay, thanks. Like I say, I'm never confident of this stuff at all. Let me hide my email. You don't want to see that. Okay, so let me get back to my notes. So we've got that picture. There are many more pictures like this online. So these protests began because of a genuine grievance against the police. It's not one incident. It's something that's been going on for years, both the police and the authorities. It doesn't just include treatment from the police, it includes poor work conditions, low housing standards, and the general idea that they're not getting a fair deal. But this time, once the anger was unleashed, it seems to have become worse, partly because the police were determined to take back control. We shared a few clips online last week of some of the events, and you guys know I was a policeman, and I'm just absolutely gobsmacked by some of the actions of the police. I would like to think that I'd never do anything like that. I left in 1981 when there were some riots, but I don't, riots in the UK for social reasons. But I don't think anybody I knew then would have done anything like that. Also note that the body armour and the weaponry that the police have is far better than some military equipment, and certainly more protective than the PPE issued to hospital staff fighting COVID-19. And this is something which has been criticised online. The term to think of here is escalation. It's a word which means making it worse. You know what an escalator is, it takes you up. So escalation means making something work, while de-escalation actually needs to take place. But this thing about the sharing of the clips and sort of spreading the information on the internet is why the authorities in some countries want to control the internet. You know, if you never see any of this information, you're not affected by it. But if you do see it, as we shared some of the stuff, then you can be affected and motivated or disgusted by it. Okay, so Has anybody heard of Gutenberg? I mean, the real Gutenberg. Johannes Gensfleisch zur Laden zum Gutenberg. That's his full name. Anybody heard of Gutenberg? Yeah, okay, right. So, he was the inventor of movable type printing. And this meant that for the first time, ordinary people could have access to information. And the church, in those days it was the Catholic Church, tried very hard to stop this. The idea that people could read things, get information, would be dangerous. So by providing this, this movable type press, the text was spread, leading indirectly to a reduction in the power of the church, and then towards the Reformation movement, you know, splitting up churches from the Catholic, used to be just the Catholic Church in Europe. We now have Protestant church and many other types of churches. So instead, it used to be just the Catholic Church controlled by the Pope. But there ended up being schismatic religions. A schism means a split from Rome. And these were actually a bit more realistic for some people in those days. So in the 16th century, there was the Gutenberg press. Now we have the internet. And that spread of information, which is very, very quick, very, very easy, has caused some governments a great deal of worry. Those postings that we've seen over the last few days inspired people in other countries to come out and protest too. So within a few days, people were protesting in areas of Europe, Australia, and elsewhere, as well as many other cities in America. At one of the protests in the UK, a group dismantled a statue of a man with the name Edward Colston, who built his fortune on slavery and made a lot of people in Bristol, which is always a powerful port city, very rich. Although there have been votes to remove the statue in the past, like those of the Confederate leaders in the United States South, where there is still some unfair treatment of blacks, this has never happened. Right? Sort of, it's always been vetoed. As a note, while looking at information for the comments I'm making now, I saw that one of the criticisms about the man depicted in the statue was that the slavery trade saw many of these Africans thrown overboard during the trips. You see, if they're ill, they don't have any value as a commodity. I mean, this is how they were treated. Although I think of them as human beings, to the slave traders, the crews on the ships, they were a commodity. If they arrived at the port ill, they could not be sold. And what happened was that many of these Africans were thrown overboard during the trips. It's even rumoured, I think this is just a rumour actually, but the sharks would learn to follow slave ships. There's some disagreement on that. I've seen figures of 2 million people thrown overboard. I'm not sure of the veracity of that. Some estimates are higher. Some of that may include people lost at sea, which would include wrecks too. One figure which I read of 100 million is not thought to be accurate, but it's probably more hyperbole, you know, sort of making a point in a debate or something. So the real figures range between 25 to 50 million Africans, 25 to 50 million people forcibly brought to the United States, the Caribbean, Central and South America, and to Europe. So we're talking about a shift of 25 to 50 million people. There's several links there. Now that statue, when it was brought down, there are clips online for this, it was dropped into the port. And I see this morning in the UK, there's now a list of statues and slave traders marked for destruction. And some see this as the thin end of a revolutionary wedge. Well, these people are past their time. This morning, probably last night actually, the video, there was one in East London of a slave trader called Robert Milligan. He was removed. And there's video. I've put a couple of links in the notes. Others in different cities and countries are also being removed. I saw one in America as well. Any questions so far? Please interrupt me, guys. Okay. So one of the ways in which blacks have been treated as less than human is depicted in media. I talked about the Red Indians, which itself is a misnomer, right? They're not Indian. I know we've got a couple of people from the Indian subcontinent in this class, and it's they're completely different people. So the Red Indians were Native Americans, probably came from Pacific tribes moving across the ocean and across the peninsula from Russia. So anyway, where am I? So particularly these less than human depictions, particularly in films and television. I make a note in the notes to a person I've mentioned before, Noam Chomsky, and his book, Manufacturing Consent. If you ever get time, do read that. So in the 20s, 30s, start of cinema, not TV, that came later, few black actors or singers would appear in the mainstream media. Although, of course, they had their own important culture, particularly with music. An example of one accepted black person is Louis Armstrong, a jazz trumpeter, with a few other significant musicians. Mostly, however, white actors appeared using what's called blackface, with one of the most well-known being Al Jolson. Let me get to this. There's Al Jolson. Okay, so there is Al Jolson. And he's actually singing there a song called My Mammy, which is one of his famous hits, also covered by other artists. This could also be from the movie The Jazz Singer. But you see there very clearly, this is a white guy with blackface. And sometimes in tweets that keep appearing these days, people are heavily criticized because they have dressed up in blackface. You know, some politicians have done that and are being criticized for it. But in the 1960s, right up to the mid-1970s, one of the most culturally insensitive shows on British television was the black and white minstrels. And I just hated this. You see there, these are a bunch of white guys. There's actually a white girl off at the side there, another one at the back, all in blackface. These were actually a group called the Mitchell Minstrels, who did a white show as well. I hated the music style. It was aimed at middle-class mums and dads. It's the sort of stuff you hear in elevators these days, you know, sort of so bland. You know, I like my music a little bit coarser. And it was aimed at these middle-class people who were just totally insensitive to the lives of black people. The BBC now admits it was one of its worst cultural errors. Okay, let me go back to the slaves. Brief moment. You see this picture here? This is a monument under the sea off the coast of Grenada. I think is it 25 or 26 children who were hands together, some chained together, depicting those who were thrown overboard. It can only be seen by divers or if you've got a glass bottom boat. Okay, let me get on with this. There's also a case of somebody called Rosa Parks. First name Rosa, R-O-S-A. Family name Parks, P-A-R-K-S. Has anybody heard of Miss Rosa Parks? Yes, great, great. That's one. Any more? I hate this medium of trying to teach you guys. You know, it doesn't, not me. Thank you, Natanai. Okay, sort of, oh, great, Jonathan, yes, denied to give her a seat. Absolutely. Okay, so let me see if I can find this. Here is a picture of Rosa Parks, not me as well. Okay, thanks, Keen. And what she did, you see here the picture, I think this was a picture taken after the event just to demonstrate. But in those days, black people were required to sit at the back of the bus. They weren't allowed to sit at the front. And she was tired one day and she just gave up. And she said, I'm not going to the back, I'm going to sit at the front because I'm tired. This was also one of the laws in South Africa, which affected, I can remember this very clearly, while the apartheid regime was still there, an English cricket team went to South Africa, and one of the members was a black guy, because we have lots of black people in the UK, and they're pretty good at cricket, you know, they actually like cricket. But what happened, he wasn't allowed on a piece of transport or a train or something, and the team almost left the country. They have separate water fountains, you know, this is for blacks only, this is for whites only, separate bathrooms, and they have separate carriages on the trains. So it's total segregation, apartheid, you know, sort of separateness. So here is a picture of Rosa Parks reenacting her famous act. And here she is actually being booked. This is a real photograph. And you'll note the expression on the white cop there. This was an event which actually started, she became a symbol of the black movement. And it led to boycotts of buses, I think in Salem, Massachusetts. And these were organized by somebody called Martin Luther King. He was a doctor of divinity, a religious person, who preached non-violence. And so a lot of the protests were non-violent in those days, at least on one side. There are several videos where the black people are being beaten by white cops. And this is 1968, you know, sort of, and he's still revered in some sections of the USA. I also found a video this morning, I don't know if I've got it on here. I'll have to access the email. Here we go. This is a white policeman in Cambridgeshire. Have we got any sound? Let me start that again. He actually says that no offence to you, but he stopped him because you're a black male. The specific reason for stopping this guy was because he was a black male. Can I get that larger? Yeah, there you go.
I've got to quite seriously. The reason I stopped you is when you came out of the barns. No offence to you, but you're a black male. Okay, I'm not gonna lie to you. All right? I'm not saying that at all. The reason I stopped you, and I'll explain if you don't finish. All right? In this area, we have a number of drug dealers. I'm not saying you're a drug dealer. They come up from other areas that don't live anywhere around here.
I live here.
I know you might know that, but I don't, so I've never met you before. Okay? So the reason I stopped you is because I haven't seen you before, and I've been a local officer for a long, long time here. So I've turned round, and then when we came out to Kings Avenue, your car has disappeared. I don't, so hang on. Like 5 in a couple of seconds. Right, I've got to go quite
Okay, so let me just kill that. So what we've got there is a situation where the guy is in a white neighborhood and the policeman has deliberately stopped him because he is black and because he makes a link between black people and selling drugs. That is absolute insensitivity. You know, sort of, and this is what policemen do, that they make these links. In England, it's not as bad as America, but the same sort of mindset, dealing with black people, dealing with minorities. You know, it doesn't matter whether they're Asian, black, Middle Eastern, particularly Muslim people in the UK. There's a great problem there. So there are problems with this insensitivity. There needs to be a lot of change. Back to America, though, there were also major problems, again in the 1960s, when the federal government insisted that, by force of law, on the integration of schools. Now, if you go to a school now, you've got black kids and white kids all together. But in the 60s, the black kids were not allowed to go to white schools. And the federal government, I think under Johnson, insisted on this and sent the troops down to make sure it happened. But there's a lot of videos which show white teenagers spitting at these kids and being violent towards them, as well as grown-up people as well, because the idea about black people being bad people, second-class citizens, was so ingrained in the people in those days, and that's why there is this problem today. Those events happened in the 1960s, Rosa Parks, the integration of schools, but people are still being killed by police for being black. While the violence and damage is questionable, you know, people are pretty angry and the police want to take back control. The anger may be justified. Now, I have my own opinions on that, but you need to make your own conclusions from what you see. I mean, don't just take these things that I've talked about today. You don't make omelettes without breaking eggs. Right now, I'm looking at stuff this morning. I was actually still writing some of this about an hour ago. There is a lot of backlash from politicians and others. Some politicians have finally begun to take the knee. This is an action by an American football player, black football player, who refused to put his arm over that stand for the national anthem at football matches, and instead took a knee because of the treatment of his black friends. He was kicked out of professional football. And Trump said a lot. He said he should go to prison. You know, for what? You know, sort of expressing an opinion. So backlash this morning. The head of the New York Police Union made an angry delivery, which is again online. I'll put a link in there. And he said, I mean, I'm just amazed at this, people should stop treating us like animals and thugs and start treating us with some respect. He's talking about the police, right? So he wants respect. As I had to learn in my days in a British police force, respect is something that is earned. You know, you don't get it just because you put a uniform on. Respect is something that's earned. Okay, that's more or less what I want to say about that today. I'd like you to ask me some questions, please, because this has wide repercussions. Think how it applies to you, if anybody's been to America or Europe. Think also how it might apply here. You know, sort of sometimes people like me are treated unequally here, which may be unfair. So anyway, your opinions, please. Can you still hear me? Yeah, right. So there's a comment there about probably why the church don't want people to be able to read, or why, when was that, 1246? Yeah, okay. So yeah, I mean, and why people, that was in the 17th century, 16th century. But also why some governments don't want people to have access to the internet, and why some governments want to control or want access to the information that is being transferred. You know, Apple has criticism leveled against it because there's no back door for the FBI to get into. Well, you know, sort of, if you open a back door, that means that not just the law authorities can get in, but anybody, criminals as well, can get in. Okay, any more questions? So people these days just take in information without filter. That's very true. Yeah, people do take in information. That's why, you know, sort of, it's worthwhile looking at several sides of an argument. I have this discussion with my mother quite regularly. Because she only looks at the BBC in England, and then only the, you know, sort of a short news broadcast, whereas I'm looking at information from newspapers or internet sources from several countries, and so I'm able to get a much larger picture of events, and I strongly recommend that. You know, technology is one thing. But if you're looking at news, okay, the same discussion with my grandmother. Yeah, right. So we're on the same thing. Yes, shares every single dubious article. Yes, I get that. Conspiracy theories that abound on the internet. Some people still think that the Americans didn't land on the moon, and that, let me think. I can't think. Kennedy was never assassinated. And yes, absolutely, degrading of the news media doesn't help. Yes, I agree completely with that. The standards of news reporting have deteriorated considerably in the last 10 or 15 years, 20 years or so. The BBC used to be an organisation that I thought could be trusted. but I certainly do not trust the BBC, particularly its UK political reporting, anymore at all. I've also seen BBC reporting from Thailand, which I don't trust, because one of the correspondents had a connection to a certain political party, and so everything was sort of angled slightly. So I don't trust the BBC at all. And it's the same with other countries, you know, sort of any country you can think of, Russia, France, they all have their particular slanted views as to the news. Consider this when you're looking at the news that you read. There may be another way to examine the same set of facts and get a different picture. Okay guys, we're done. Thank you very much. I've got to try and get out of this now. Okay, see you next week then. Thank you very much.